Good morning. It is Friday the 16th of January. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up today, the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas is finalising a fresh round of sanctions on Iran. EU ambassadors have been working around the clock to target all those responsible for the violent crackdown on protesters. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey and Oman have been urging Donald Trump not to launch airstrikes against Iran in a last-minute lobbying campaign. While we wait to see what happens next, I'm joined here in the studio by our correspondent, Shona Murray. Good morning.
Morning, Maeve.
Tell us, what is the EU planning and can they do it fast?
Well, we know nothing really happens too fast because you're talking about 27 countries, but there were technical talks yesterday. And as you mentioned, Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief, is about to propose a package of sanctions against those responsible for this brutal crackdown in Tehran and all across Iran. Now, what we do know from sources is there's going to be 21 individuals under the human rights regime. Those are people who are directly responsible for this state repression. And then 10 individuals under the drone system, the drone regime. Now, we know that Iran is a big provider of drones to Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. What's outstanding is whether there will be a terrorist designation for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And that's a really interesting issue because obviously people think this obviously should happen. But what I heard from sources is this is an area of state repression. It's not necessarily terrorism. But that doesn't mean that the EU isn't fully behind the momentum of the protesters and doesn't have empathy. And we heard yesterday from President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen from Cyprus, talking about this.
We are looking into deepening the sanctions against Iran. These sanctions are biting. So I would not just put them aside. They are biting and they have their effect. They are weakening the regime, and the sanctions help to push forward that this regime comes to an end and that there is a change. It is in the very end the people of Iran who are bravely fighting for a change. They have our full support. They have our full political support.
Commission President von der Leyen there speaking in Cyprus. And Shona, what is the EU's position on whether or not the US should strike Iran?
Well, obviously there's no official position. I spoke to a few people about this. There's certain ways of looking at it. I mean, what will that achieve, first of all? Is it going to be targeted military strikes against the regime? Is it going to be individuals who are responsible for the repression? What comes afterwards? And then there's the issue of whether or not if America were to strike Iran, would that then, in the eyes of the regime, say, delegitimize the protesters, saying, oh, they're just tools of the United States, and then they could crack down even further. We've seen complex interventions in the Middle East in the past. So the question is, what is set to achieve? What will be the aftermath? And the EU's position is really that if there is an overthrow of this regime, and we heard from Metsola earlier in the week, President of the European Parliament, that the regime is in its last legs, then it should come from within. That's the ideal. The EU will put the sanctions on Tehran, and it hopes that it'll unsettle it that way. Maeve?
Okay, we'll keep a very close eye on that, Shona Murray. Thank you so much for all those details. But coming up now, we'll be joined by Andris Spruds, the Latvian Minister for Defence, a former professor and expert on foreign policy. He's a member of the Latvian Progressive Party and he's been a minister since 2023. So good morning, Minister. Thank you so much for joining us. First, I'd like to ask you about Greenland. What is the mood among some NATO allies about Trump's intentions for Greenland?
Collective security in the High North, in the Arctic, is very important. And of course, that's why also Latvia is able and willing to contribute if necessary. But at the same time, it is important, of course, to once more underline that Greenland is an integral part of Danish Kingdom of Denmark.
And could this bring about the end of NATO, as the Danes have warned?
I would not over-dramatize. Of course, now we are in the process of discussing, especially the dialogue between the United States and Denmark. We see also in NATO sometimes there are some dialogues or discussions among countries. We know already for some time there is the discussion, interaction between Greece and Turkey, but it doesn't mean that it somehow undermines NATO. Everybody understands the importance of collective defense. Everybody understands the importance of NATO as a strong alliance, and this is mutually beneficial for both, for the United States and for Europe. That's why I am absolutely believe and confident it's not end at all. But discussions certainly will go on. Latvia's position is clear in this regard: collective defense and Greenland as a territorial part, of course, of the Danish kingdom.
And some countries, of course, are sending troops for deterrence and surveillance. What is Latvia doing?
Well, we once more underline the willingness to contribute to the collective defense of NATO, also in the High North. High North and the Arctic is strategically important, and we fully realize it, and we are in different NATO missions. And if required, the Latvian troops or Latvian military presence, to some extent, also could be, of course, discussed and considered in Greenland. But, of course, the request must be there. And, yes, the mandate from the government and also the Latvian parliament should be given if there is some additional presence.
Okay, and Minister, of course, what about the war in Ukraine? Do you support the idea of an EU envoy for Russia? Is that a good idea?
Well, we have to speak from positions of strength. We have to realize what we are dealing with. So that's why, of course, now in this context, there are some peace efforts. And we also appreciate President Trump's efforts in this regard, and also the contribution by the EU, also the coalition of the willing. It is important that Europe is stepping up and Europe is demonstrating its willingness and strength to be part of the peace process. At the same time, let's realize what we are dealing with. So we always have to speak, negotiate, act from positions of strength. That's why the Europe stepping up is a crucial and primary task and goal for Europeans. Yes, we can engage in some diplomatic activities, but there must be some limits how far we can go. And of course, always strength is absolutely the basis we start from negotiations with Russia.
And just finally, we've seen that Latvia has reintroduced compulsory military subscription for women. Would you like to see all EU countries follow suit?
First of all, Latvia thinks and invests and acts actively on strengthening our defense. This year, almost 5% from our GDP goes to defense investment, so it is crucial. It is a comprehensive defense. We want to involve as many people as possible. We have reintroduced conscription, obligatory, mandatory so far only for men. But there is discussion in Latvia on potentially expanding, also involving women. Women now are joining the conscription service on voluntary basis. In general, in our armed forces, around 20% are women. So we're very proud of these numbers, very proud of our soldiers who are contributing to defense and security of Latvia and NATO. So that's why, yes, a comprehensive defense, everybody is involved, everybody actively contributes.
Okay, Minister Spruds, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Europe Today. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we're speaking here, EU leaders Antonio Costa, the President of the EU Council, and Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, are getting ready to fly to Paraguay ahead of the prestigious signing of the Mercosur deal. They'll be touching base first in Brazil for talks with President Lula. For more on Brussels' accelerated trade agenda of late, I'm joined here in the studio by Euronews' EU editor. That's, of course, Maria Tadeo. So the big day has come, the signing ceremony. What should we expect?
Look, it's finally happening. The signature around the Mercosur, more than 20 years in the making. As you say, the head of the Commission and the European Council will be heading to Brazil. They will meet bilaterally first with the Brazilian President. Lula is obviously the key player, is the biggest economy among the Mercosur, and then head to Paraguay for the signature. Of course, the numbers, we've heard about them many times now. This is now going to create a market of 700 million consumers. This is a commission, but also Germany and Spain, clearly with huge business interests that have pushed for this deal relentlessly, really jumping through political hurdles. Of course, the French government, societal pushback. Again, the Mercosur is and remains to be completely toxic among the farming community in Europe. And then, of course, there's pending legal questions and the vote in the European Parliament. And I want to stress, ultimately, this is being celebrated today, but we should be clear, this is not going to fix the deeply structural issues of the European industry, and it's not going to save the German car industry overnight. But, and this is really what Brussels diplomats continue to stress and has told me many times, at a time, and this is really the key point here, at a time in which the multilateral trade system and the EU needs this to survive, it needs this to make money. And this is collapsing because of the trade tariffs and the Trump tariffs. At this time, they've managed to get this deal done. The timing is key, and that is the value of it. There's huge optics in it.
And of course, you mentioned the tariffs, and the Trump tariffs are here to stay, Maria, today. What is the European Union doing to counteract these?
Yes, and you look, we hear this repeatedly, this idea of we need to turbocharge our trade agreements with other countries, because the Trump tariffs, of course, announced on Liberation Day, they were slightly smaller now compared to the initial numbers, but we've got to be very clear, they have tripled when it comes to the European exports going into the US. They're now operating around 15%. Before we looked at a rate of 5%, so obviously it's making life difficult for European producers. And the answer now from the Commission is go out, capture the world, and open new markets. There is no other way for European products, and that's why we've seen now, and hopefully we can put it up on the screen, the agenda that they're carrying forward. India is the big goal now. They missed a deadline to get this FTA, this free trade agreement, at the end of last year. We know there were really serious, very difficult sticking points in agriculture. They hope to get that done before potentially the end of this month. They want to get this thing on paper now, and then reaching out to countries in Asia and the Gulf. The UAE is another big country they've launched talks with already last year.
Indeed, Maria Sale, our Euronews EU editor, thank you so much for all those details. And the aim, of course, of these trade deals is for EU consumers, for us to be able to buy goods and services at better prices, improve our purchasing power, because as it stands, the cost of living crisis is still pinching, especially in countries like Portugal, who are holding presidential elections this Sunday. Ahead of the key votes, Euronews has published an exclusive poll on who's in the lead. You can read it on our website, euronews.com, but not before taking a look at this report on why these votes matter. Jakub Janis reports.
Portugal is electing a new president this Sunday, and for the first time in 40 years, we might not have an immediate winner. Usually, Portuguese presidential elections are predictable, but not this time. With rents soaring while wages stagnate, it pushes frustrated voters towards the extremes. So who is riding this wave of anger? First, the veteran, Antonio José Seguro, a former socialist leader pitching himself as a safe pair of hands who returns from the political exile. Then the liberal, João Contrim Figueiredo, a pro-business MEP and a vice president of Renew Europe that promises to cut taxes and shake up the economy. And we also have the showman, André Ventura, the far-right opposition leader who is a former TV commentator. He runs on an anti-corruption and anti-immigration platform, and he wants to be a prime minister, but is using this run to cement his power. But watch out for the dark horse, the Admiral Enrique Gouveia y Mel, a non-politician military man who promises order and discipline, and who could upset the entire race. Finally, the insider, Luis Marques Mendes. He is backed by the ruling party, and he vows to wake Portugal up from its complacency. Though the role is mostly ceremonial, the president does hold the atomic bomb, so the power to dissolve the parliament. And with the current government ruling without a majority, and voters angry about the cost of living, the next president will not be just cutting ribbons. If no one wins outright, the second round will take place on the 8th of February.
And for more news and context on the presidential race or any of the stories we're covering for you here, do take a look at euronews.com or download our app. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter, Europe Today. But that does bring this edition to an end. Thank you so much for being with us and for tuning in. See you very soon here on Euronews.